Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight, the embattled South African working class to dig even deeper into their pockets after taxi operators decide to hike fares for commuters. We speak to the country's leading taxi associations.
Have the courage to challenge any behavior that is ethically out of character.
A new border management regime begins in earnest. We chat to the men entrusted with managing South Africa's porous borders. Border Management Authority head Dr. Mike Masiapato on the day he deployed the first cohort of border guards. That and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Taxi fares are set to increase in most parts of Gauteng and the Western Cape on Friday. The United Taxi Association Front has also threatened a provincial shutdown should the government fail to resolve the taxi industry's challenges within 21 days. The front made the announcement during a briefing in Fourways. It was joined by its mother body, the National Taxi Alliance.
Taxi fares are set to increase in most parts of Gauteng on Friday. The United Taxi Association Front has also threatened a provincial shutdown should government fail to resolve the taxi industry challenges within 21 days. The front made the announcement during a briefing in Fourways. It was joined by its mother body, the National Taxi Alliance.
We are giving our national structure, National Taxi Alliance and the government 21 days to respond. If that doesn't happen, we will ask our national structure that we want to have a national shutdown, whereby we'll close the whole country. No bus will move, no aeroplanes will move, no lift transport.
Gauteng commuters in parts of West Rand and Johannesburg Central will see a spike in taxi fares. UTAF says an increase is always the last resort.
We found ourselves forced to increase fares by at least 10 rand per fare or per traveling fare. However, we're doing our very best to try and mitigate even that.
But the industry can no longer absorb the cost of rising petrol prices and daily running costs. It's pointed out that the industry is still recovering from the effects of the pandemic.
Government is actually dragging its feet, is coming with all sorts of nonsensical ways of trying to avoid paying everybody within the taxi industry.
The association and the NTA delayed effecting an increase and embarking on a shutdown pending talks with government stakeholders. These talks have now deadlocked.
That was, of course, here in Gauteng. But an early morning protest by taxi operators from the northern areas of Gqeberha in the Eastern Cape caused havoc on the city's roads this morning. The taxi operators focused their protest on the Stanford Road intersection on the N2. They are protesting against the rising price of fuel. SABC Slengile was on the scene.
Tensions ran high between the protesters and the police. Stun grenades were used to break up the protest. 8 vehicles were impounded as the blockage was cleared. The taxi drivers say this was the only way to get the message across.
We need to call a meeting. People must stand up in our area. This is the kind of community where this thing has started. We need to be acknowledged of what we were doing today here. It's not a good thing, but we're all suffering under it.
Our message to the government is they must please help us. Maybe a levy or something, give something towards. Or can't they subsidize us with petrol? Can they make us a subsidy for the taxis for petrol? Because we can't afford it.
The strike affected thousands of commuters, but some understand why.
Yes, I'm working since 5 o'clock with my feet, and I'm working in Kempston Road so far since 5 o'clock this morning because of the taxis. It's not right, young.
Yeah, we're not gonna get paid today because there's no money. Because they're gonna start burning now.
This is not what we expected, but I don't think it's gonna stop unless the government changes their view on how they see us as citizens in response to the petrol prices that went up.
The temporary closure of the N2 created congestion throughout the city as the motorists used alternative routes. SABC News, Nkabera.
Well, stories, of course, you saw there in Gqeberha, but also the media briefing, of course, that was held earlier here in Gauteng, and of course elsewhere in the other provinces. Discussions are actually going on about what needs to happen next. Taxi owners, taxi operators, as you have heard from those stories, can't take these petrol prices that continue to rise. They are saying that they have no choice but to actually hike the fares. Some of the fares are, of course, quite steep, and we are going to show you some of them now here in Gauteng, in the Western Cape as well. But for a conversation, I am joined by Theo Malele here in the studio. He is from the National Taxi Alliance. He is the PRO, but Thabo Moilwa is online. He is Santaco Gauteng's Public Relations Officer. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening to you, Vuyo. Good evening to the viewers at home, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, from what you guys were saying earlier, you've had to agonize over this. You didn't arrive at these fares, the fares you have arrived at easily.
Yes, certainly not. It's been very, very difficult. As we speak, there are members of the taxi industry that are losing their vehicles by virtue of not being able to can meet their monthly financial obligations because our margins are squeezed to a point that even the maintenance of vehicles, it's quite steepy. We've been trying to absorb, these costs as the taxi industry would do. You would rightfully know, Vuyo, that, businesses normally adjust, their prices on an annual basis. But the taxi industry, knowing very well that it's a community-based organization or rather business, it, tries to absorb these prices. But the manner in which the prices have gone up, it really is unbearable.
And take us through perhaps some of the conversations that your members were having as you weighed the pros and cons, how you arrived, at the fares that you arrived at.
Now, look, obviously the members have actually complained to us, and myself as a taxi operator have felt the pinch, to an extent that, if you look at the amount of money that you now have to spend on fuel, I think on a petrol-propelled vehicle, you now have to fork out about 6,000 rands more, and on a diesel-propelled vehicle, you now have to spend around 3,025 rands more, and the maintenance of the spares have actually gone up. And that then, we also looked at the percentage of the increases before the two previous increases. And, having crunched those, we really felt that these input costs were so unbearable, and the only best way of trying to offset these input costs is to adjust our tariffs in order for us to be able to survive. You would also appreciate that, Vuyo, that the taxi industry is not being supported by government whatsoever. And it is actually charging charity fares as opposed to market-related fares. And all that we want to see happen is that the authorities must actually ensure that they subsidize the passengers in order for the passengers not to feel this brunt.
Thabo, I mean, take us through what your members have been going through and the kinds of conversations they have been having before, of course, taking decisions, the decisions around the fares that we're talking about today. I don't know if you heard me. I was asking just you to just take us through what some of your members, I mean, the issues that they brought up as you were trying to decide what to do, how to adjust fares, and what informed those decisions. Okay, seems to have that line. He is frozen. Well, hopefully we're going to try and okay, it looks like we can hear you now.
Yeah, good evening, viewers.
Yes. I was saying your considerations, the sort of choices you had to make before you arrived at whether or not and by how much you should increase fares.
Thank you. When we try to raise our fares, what we do, we always communicate with our people. We try to look at what is the best, because remember, the petrol goes up almost every month. So it is impossible for us to increase our fares every month. And with petrol, it means it involves all our value chain that we have. Everything have gone up. So in this case, the best way is for us to continue negotiating with the government, because the petrol pain is killing all of us. The drivers, you look at them, and then you also look at the toll gates, the one that we are doing long distance, the toll gates are going up and everything is going up. So for us, for now, is that the government, let's look at what we can do. And the government, as my fellow colleagues have said, we must look at the issue of subsidizing now. It's long overdue. So, but as the national structure is doing that on behalf of us, Mr. President, Chairman Tsebe, and the Minister of Transport, Mr. Mbalula, I think they are in advance with the negotiations concerning this issue of petrol.
Well, listening in, of course, in this conversation is Owen Ngomo. Owen, it was coming, wasn't it?
Thank you for having me, Vuyo. Yes, definitely, it's been long coming, and I must commend the taxi industry for having practiced a lot of patience over the past few years while the price of fuel has been going up like this. I think they've really given our traveling citizens a lot of room. And I guess they came to a point where they could not take it anymore. And I guess no one can if the price of fuel has gone up about 100% in about 24 months.
And I mean, this is going to put a lot more pressure. I mean, the food prices have already been going up. Salaries aren't, unfortunately. So, and considering the fact that, I mean, by and large, I mean, taxis are used by the working class. So it is that class that's going to really feel the pinch, perhaps more than other groups in society.
Most definitely, Bravoyo, because if we start to crunch the numbers, you essentially can say that given the fact that people's salaries have not been going up, but the prices of food, prices of fuel, price of electricity and anything else that we buy at the end of the month has gone up exponentially. and salaries have actually not. You can essentially say that people have taken a lot of salary cut, and the level of inflation is actually dimming that little change that is left in our pockets at the end of the month. Also, to be reducing very quickly in terms of what it can buy for us. And I think that there's never been a time like this for the country where we're dealing with as many problems as we're dealing with at the moment, and an economy that's not growing, electricity problems, increasing fuel prices, unemployment, and I don't know how we can unravel this conundrum that we're dealing with at the moment. And we're gonna have to start getting used to the fact that people will take things to extremes in order to absorb some of these price increases, just like the taxi industry has done.
I mean, going into the future, you both spoke about the subsidies, that are being negotiated currently. How do you think subsidies are going to or may just help?
Look, currently, this issue of subsidies, like you and I are having a conversation about, does not seem to actually strike a chord in government's ear, because this has been spoken about, from days in memoriam, and nothing has actually, come to fruition. But what we envisage as the National Taxi Alliance is that if the passengers are subsidized, we should be able to charge market-related prices in order for us to become a profitable business. With the current manner in which the COVID-19 relief fund has actually been paid out to the taxi industry, it's proof enough that indeed there is a formula or a system that can be actually put into place in order to pay, or rather, yes, to compensate, taxi owners for the service that they would have provided to their customers. And obviously, we would have to come up with innovative ideas of bringing in perhaps an integrated ticketing system, some form of, nullifying cash, between the driver and, the commuting masses, so that we are able to can also, have a proper count on the passengers that we ferry on a daily basis.
Here, do you think that there is a lack of willingness on the part, another lack of political will on the part of the government to actually deal with this matter? Or do you think that the process that is currently underway is, there is some hope? Now, you're sensing a commitment on the part of government that they are finally willing and prepared to address this matter?
Yes, I think on that one, I can say my fellow colleagues was talking about the relief fund. The government have moved away from the requirements that they needed on the relief fund. So is possible for the government also to do the same if they want to also to subsidize us? They have seen that that formula can work. So I think they can now start to work at that formula, because what we are going to say about subsidy is long overdue, and then there's nothing that is stopping the government. E.g., they can also subsidize us when we buy our cars. They can maybe say, instead of us spending 100% on buying a vehicle, they can put a 35% the portion of on the price of the vehicle, so that in return we don't have to pay large amount of installment at the end of the month that we can't afford. Because remember, COVID has destroyed the taxi industry as a whole as we speak. And secondly, now people are working from home. And that it means more than 30% of the people that we were loading on daily basis, we don't have that. So it means our income have gone down by 30% if you look at it, or even more.
And at the end of the day, I mean, assuming that the current or the ongoing negotiations are being done in good faith, and assuming again that the government does indeed want to address this outstanding issue. At the end of the day, though, it's going to come down to money, isn't it? Whether it does have that money. Owen?
100% true. 100% true, Bravo. It's interesting the response that the gentleman just gave now about how government can help the taxi industry. I wish that the public knew how much it costs these guys to buy these taxis, especially if they're funded by the private sector or the companies that were set up to fund this taxi industry. They pay too much in interest. And, outside of the issue of tax and stuff like that, I think the margins in the taxi industry are very slow. And I think the taxi industry, because it's helping the government, I do think the government needs to have a more long-term plan to subsidize the taxi industry, because they are fixing what the government should have addressed a long time ago, which is a good public network of transport, which would help us in the economy. And I think the taxi industry is doing a big deal in solving that for the government. So therefore, I do think the government needs, in its budget, to find an allocation that will help them deal with this challenge, because the government has failed dismally to provide good public transport outside of the taxi industry. And again, you make a valid point. The economy is in such a big fix. We have to think about the fact that if the economy is not growing, we're not increasing the amount of tax that's being collected. So if we have to redirect subsidies to the industry, you probably have to go and raise money from somewhere, or you probably have to redirect capital from other departments that have been given money by the government out of the national fiscus. And I do think that another way to look at this is for the government probably to say, let's do away with REF, let's do away with some of the levies in the fuel price for the current period where we can't handle the increase in the price of oil, where we can't deal or cushion ourselves from the weakening of the currency. So the one thing that we can deal with is to remove REF and remove the levies out of the system. Obviously, it's going to have an impact on fiscus, but I think something has to give. And I'm worried that we're going to have major social unrest if things continue like this, and the government is not taking this problem with the urgency that it requires.
But given everything we know, I mean, the challenges we face and the calls that are being made in other quarters, for example, for a basic income grant. In fact, right now, we're talking about the relief of a social distress grant that the government is battling with. And on the back of that, there are calls for a basic income grant. Our energy challenges and everything that goes with that. Do you think that they have the fiscal space to actually deliver on what the taxi associations are hoping they will be able to deliver on? Owen?
Look, I think it's a matter now of reprioritizing the budgets, Bravoyo. It has been done before. It's done in the midterm budgets, and I think the government really needs to help the rest of the economy, particularly people that use taxis. And the whole country is affected by higher oil prices, but I think that we need to prioritize this one, because if all of a sudden I'm supposed to pay 50% more for a taxi, do I really have incentive to go to work? We now have a lot of people being unemployed in disguise. You go to work, but what you're earning is really not worth the amount you need to survive. Many people are just going to be pushed below the poverty line. And does the government have the money? I really think that we're in a fix. We have to reprioritize and allocate and take money from some departments that are not necessarily very crucial, and support this industry and support other places that have been adversely affected by the higher price of oil, Bravoyo. Otherwise, as I've said, I anticipate that there'll be a lot of social unrest. People are being taken out of their comfort zones, and I think this is the time that the government needs to take advantage of this crisis as well to shape a different dispensation in terms of how we're managing our public funds and to try and grow the economy.
I mean, Theo, of course, the subsidies issue isn't the only one. What are the other issues for your industry right now as you're going forward, as you enter into, are in these conversations with the government? What are the other issues that, as the industry, you also want to address that can help in the sustainability of the industry?
Very well, Vuyo. We now have a challenge with a government that does not want to listen. We have taken the initiative of writing to government, to the Minister of Energy, Mr. Kwere Mantashe, and copied the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula. They lacked the courtesy of acknowledging receipt of our letter. In that letter, we're proposing, though, that this industry that creates 400,000 direct and indirect employment cannot just be left to go under just like that. Something has to be done to save this industry. We've spoken about the Road Accident Fund, which has been not properly managed. That if we could do away with that, it's almost 273 or somewhere around there, and some of the taxes, and give back maybe that's 6 rands per litre to the taxi industry as an interim measure, whilst we're looking at the challenges that are being brought about by the geopolitics between Russia and Ukraine. It's a question of a government that would listen. The government has taken the ostrich approach and decided to bury its head in the sand. Now, who do we talk to? And what do we resort to? Now, the only bottom line, basically, the mandate that we got today is that they have 21 days to get their ducks in a row. And failure to do that, we will then take this to the taxi industry broadly for broader consultations. And this that those people would be telling us to do will be the actual activity that government will have to face. Unfortunately, there are no other avenue, but perhaps if we had this dialogue, this interaction with government, that would actually bring about more ideas onto the table. And certainly we would be able to find a solution. I mean, if the challenges that we had during the dark days of this country were resolved through negotiations, what would actually impede us from finding everlasting solutions? It's just a question of listening. They must stop behaving and acting like demigods, for crying out loud. They are public servants. They must do their work.
I guess, you would echo these sentiments as well, Tawa. But one final point I wanted to raise, given that I have both of you here. One of the stories we are running is of, conversations that were taking place in KwaZulu-Natal today, about investigating and bringing an end to some of the violence we've been seeing for years now. Just your thoughts around what it is that we need to do to really, end this violence.
Yeah, Vuyo, this is a difficult question, but it's not so difficult. Because in some instances, Minister of Police will say within 72 hours, the perpetrators will be got and then they will be arrested. But in the taxi industry, it never happened. So we are just asking ourselves for how is government treating us? So that takes our back to what my colleague says, that the government sometimes is taking us for granted and then they don't want to listen. So we want the government to listen because many of families are having offense. So we cannot keep on doing offense in the taxi industry while we have a government that we support in all aspects. I think what happens today in KwaZulu-Natal, they must give them 72 hours, for example, so that they can see that those things are possible. And then they must arrest those people. That will appreciate from our government if it can do that. Then we can start to know that our government is starting to listen. And also the frustration of our members is pushing them for 21 days. So let's not forget that.
Theo, from your vantage point, what are some of the contributing factors to the continuation of violence?
It's it's a cocktail of issues that have been spelled out by Judge Jeremiah Shongwe in the recent Commission on Taxi Violence. He cites quite a number of challenges like the duplication of operating licenses, where you have two associations being given the right to operate along the same routes. That's a recipe for disaster. There is also government officials who have an interest in the taxi industry. And there are police, men and women, who also are having an interest in the industry. And that has been found out by Judge Jeremiah Shongwe, in that most of the firearms that were used are state-issued firearms. So, there needs to be an audit, a very serious audit, with those that have a direct, rather relations, or rather that are supposed to be saving the taxi industry. Those people's lifestyles must be audited, because it is them that actually take brown envelopes, and at the end of the day, we see blood flowing on the streets. But having said that, it is also the question of those that have been found to be guilty of an offense. They should actually face the full might of the law, and they shouldn't be allowed back into the taxi industry, because they actually perpetuate that.
Owen Gomo, one final thought, as in fact we're going to bring up a tweet, someone saying, imagine, how we can bring up that tweet quickly. Yasmilo says, imagine if the taxi industry was to link their fare increases to the fuel hike every month.
Yeah, that would be a disaster, exactly. Bravuyo. And that's why I said earlier, I really commend the industry for being so patient with their customers. And I think that the temporary solution the government provided during COVID created a formula that I believe should be used to avoid, making things worse for the people that are the most disenfranchised, that probably use taxis. As I speak to you, I'm sitting in the dark, literally. ESCOM just went off, power just went off at 8 o'clock. And I think this cocktail of problems that the country is dealing with is not going to end nicely if our government doesn't get into emergency scrums on a daily basis to try and create a solution for the country, particularly when it comes to fuel price, particularly when it comes to ESCOM's everlasting problems. I think we might be ending the next generation a country that is very empty.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Owen Ngomo, thank you very much. He is the CEO of Inkunzi Investment. We also had Thabo Moilwa, who is Santako Gauteng Public Relations Officer. And from the National Taxi Alliance, we have its spokesperson, Theo Malele. Thanks to all of you, gentlemen, for being part of this conversation. Up next, we speak to the man driving major changes in the management of the country's porous borders. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. It's the beginning of a new era in the management of the country's porous borders, at least according to those in authority. Today, the first cohort of border guards, 200 of them, were deployed at the Beitbridge port of entry near Musina in Limpopo. It's all part of the changes to be introduced under the recently enacted Border Management Authority Act.
The Border Management Authority initiative aims to facilitate legal cross-border movement and curb cross-border crimes such as the smuggling of goods. This cohort of guards will be deployed in segments of the borderline considered vulnerable. A large part of their training looked at fitness and physical strength.
Those guys can shoot. Those guns can shoot. And I hope their most important weapon won't be the guns that they are carrying, but will be their integrity.
Motsoaledi spoke strongly against those whom he says continue to undermine the sovereignty of the country. He says an illegal entry into the country is similar to an invasion.
Where some gentlemen from Pakistan were going illegally into the country and going in through passages that are made for fire hydrants. Now, that was not an illegal entry into South Africa. It was an invasion of the country. And we're supposed to fold our arms and smile. When your country is being invaded, there is no country anywhere in the world that will allow that. I'm surprised why people believe we must allow that type of a thing. It's not going to happen anymore in this country. What I saw there at the airport was an invasion. Yes, people were invading our country. For what purpose? I don't know.
The Border Management Authority is expected to be fully established in April 2023. The project is a collaborative effort by various government departments. The 70 million initiative hopes to secure another 600 border guards for close to 5,000 kilometers of the borderline. The spirited guards declared by signing an oath that they will execute their duties diligently and faithfully.
We further swear to serve with vigilance and excellence, and we will always have the courage to challenge any behavior that is ethically out of character, and hold ourselves and board and fellow border guards accountable for our actions. We take this oath freely and with no reservation. So help us God.
Across the majestic Limpopo River lies Zimbabwe. The area where we are reporting from is considered as no man's land. This is seen as one of the vulnerable areas where members of the Border Management Authority will be deployed. Katlehonyoni, SABC News, Limpopo River.
Well, I'm now joined by Dr. Mike Masiapato, who is the commissioner responsible for the newly established Border Management Authority. Good evening, Commissioner, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo, and your listeners and viewers, and thanks for the invite.
So 200 people for today who took that oath today. How many are we looking at altogether in terms of your plans?
You see, the whole process of having to establish the Border Management Authority is a long-term process. It is a long-term process to the extent that if you look at the roadmap that has been developed, effectively from 2017, we were looking at having around 15,000 or so, border guards around 2032. That is the overall plan. So if you look at the 200 that has been unveiled today, as it were, it is in a way the start of that particular journey, as it were. But of course, we do know that we can't necessarily just rely on numbers, as it were. We are supposed to also be deploying technologies in this particular environment so that we are able to then address the problem statement of porous borders.
Okay. So where have these men and women been drawn from? What skills do they possess?
In terms of the actual process, let me start by indicating for you that we did not necessarily do a conventional recruitment of the cadets or the ordinary students that had to then go for training over a period of time. And the reason why we didn't use that approach is because of the agency of the problem, as it were. So on that basis, we started the recruitment process during March this year. And in that particular process, we then made an advertisement to indicate that we are looking for very much patriotic South Africans that are willing to be able to assist us in terms of ensuring that we deal with this problem statement of the porous borders. So in that particular context, we had around 14,800 responses that we received from South Africans. And arising from that, we were able to come up with this 200. So in terms of where did we draw them? We drew them from the border community areas in particular, because that has been our focus in terms of the actual recruitment. The people that are to be deployed here in Beitbridge, for instance. They come from here in Limpopo, and some of them come from around here in Musina, others in Toyando, and all of those kind of places. And similarly, in other segments where we are going to be deploying others, we've recruited in those areas. In terms of the skills, we looked for people that had already been trained a bit in terms of kind of law enforcement issues, because we did not have much time, and that is why we basically used that approach. But in the new financial year, we'll then go for the normal cadets.
So this first group, I mean the 200 or so that was sworn in today, are going to be deployed at Beitbridge. Is that correct?
Not really, Vuyo. We just used Beitbridge as the point
for the
of
ceremony.
the launch.
Okay.
Yeah, we basically used this as the point of the launch. But in terms of the actual deployment, they are going to be deployed in the 6 key segments that had been identified as the problematic areas across our border line, as it were.
Okay. I mean, we're talking about a borderline of what? 4,772 kilometers. So are you going to deploy everywhere, or are you just going to target the 6 that you're talking about, which you're saying are more problematic or vulnerable?
That is indeed the approach. You will remember that in terms of the entire borderline, as it were, we do have our colleagues from the South African National Defence Force who are doing border protection as well as border safeguarding as provided for in the Constitution and the Defence Act, as it were. So our deployment on the borderline is targeting what we call the vulnerable segments. These are the areas that had been jointly identified both by ourselves as the Border Management Authority and members of the SANDF. These are the areas that are being exploited and used by some nefarious elements doing illegalities, whether in terms of illegal migration or even in terms of the movement of illicit goods in and out of our jurisdiction.
And then, I mean, if, let's take the 6 that are known, what are the, from the work that you've done, one would imagine you've done some research work, you scenarios and that kind of thing. How big is the potential that where you then strengthen through the deployment of these guards, other points could be developed or explored by the people, whether it's people who want to not go via migration or the illicit transportation, of goods.
Yeah, maybe let me start by maybe demonstrating the actual areas and the kind of criminality that we are going to be dealing with. If you look at, for example, here in Beitbridge, we talk about this segment going into Zimbabwe, as it were. Here we are dealing with illegal migration, for example, the movement of explosives, as well as, for example, cigarettes. The next contingent will deploy them in Skukuza, for example, around Kruger National Park. In there, we are going to be dealing with issues of wildlife trafficking, as you will know, with the killing of rhinos and all of that. Then we'll go to Libombo. In there, we are also, in terms of our border with Mozambique, there we are going to be dealing with issues of, gun smuggling, for example, and all of those, including illegal migration. Furthermore, if you go to Oshhoek, our border with Swaziland, we deal with livestock-related issues there, where cross-border communities are being exploited in terms of, stock theft. The next place is Northern KwaZulu-Natal, around Mtawe Lengana. There is around Kosi Bay. We are going to be dealing with the issue of our SUVs being hijacked and being moved into Mozambique. So the border guards will be statically deployed. And of course, the last segment is the one to Lesotho in the Free State. That is Maseru Bridge and Fixbank. There we are dealing with issues of livestock, as well as issues of the movement of firearms, as well as the issues around livestock theft also in that environment. So these are the identified segments. Now, we do agree with your point that obviously once you seal a particular segment, criminality then moves to the next area. Remember, the SANDF will be there doing the overall patrol. So as soon as criminality moves to the next part, we work jointly with the Defence Force, we identify the next vulnerable area, we deploy there, and that is how we are going to be dealing with the situation until we are able to mitigate this porous border issue.
Well, part of the problem, of course, has been, and I mean, it's a well-known fact, that Home Affairs staff, some of them, are vulnerable to corruption. So what's your strategy on that front in ensuring that these guards don't get tainted, get into cahoots with some corrupt Home Affairs officials as well as criminals?
Yeah, so indeed, you are very right. The issue of corruption is a problem in Home Affairs and even beyond in the country, as it were. But in terms of this cohort, what we have done, we have done very extensive vetting to them in order to make sure that we actually recruit people of high integrity. In this particular process, we had to make sure that they go through vetting, which was extensively done by our colleagues from the State Security Agency. Additional to that, we had also committed to conduct continuous lifestyle audits on them in terms of making sure that we are able to pick up in instances where individuals get compromised. But additional to that, we have also trained them extensively on issues of integrity, on issues of ethics. And I think you might have also seen the clip that you played where one of the border guards, the border guard Tabete, was actually reading the oath that they have actually taken, demonstrating that indeed they are committing themselves to be patriotic and also to make sure that they are not going to be that easily corruptible. But the other issue is there's going to be a very closer supervision activities that we are going to be deploying on them in order to make sure that they don't get easily compromised. But that is one thing that we know exists and is real, but we shall make sure that we closely monitor the activities to make sure that indeed they are not going to be compromised.
I'm going to try and bring up a tweet or two, Commissioner, that have come through. Let's see if we can put them up on screen. Someone here says, well, it's late. Mashiko Mukone says, it's late already. Those foreigners are well armed and in multitudes inside the country. Tightening borders will bear no fruit. It was a deliberate move to let them in, this stupid government.
Yeah, well, you see, the reality of it is we have over 28 years up to this point deployed a multi-agency approach in terms of border management. And that has demonstrated not to be helpful to us as a jurisdiction or as a country. So to that extent, we are now moving into an integrated approach with a single command and control. Each and every port will have a single commander. Currently, as you will know, there are multiplicity of departments on the environment, and it had been making border management very much difficult. So in this instance, we do agree with the principle or the point raised to say, even if you try and tighten borders now, the people are already in the country who are not, for example, desirable or who are actually perpetrating criminal activities in the country. But one thing that is a fact is, one, you will note that there is a group or a grouping within the Department of Home Affairs called Immigration Inspectorate. Their responsibility is to work inside the country, make sure that they identify people that are undesirable or undocumented, and get those people actually processed out of the country or getting them documented. That work, they are going to be doing it together with members of the South African Police Services. Remember this point. Always there has been activities done to try and clean up the country. But as they do that, people get deported, but in 24 hours they return. So now, once we are able to get the borders, I will say, effectively taken care of in terms of the border guards, once the undesirable individuals are deported, they would not necessarily find it easy to walk back into the country. It is a journey. We know that it's not something that can just be achieved or realized in 24 hours.
Okay, very, very briefly, we have run out of time, Commissioner, but I mean, today it was more, ceremonial. What are the, just tell us, just name the, 2 or 3 milestones that we should be looking forward to now as you begin your work in earnest?
Yeah, I think maybe I would say, Vuyo, one of the, I would say, immediate issues that we need to be dealing with is to reduce the number of people who walk into the country undocumented or without documentation. Our key objective is to make sure those people are therefore, in a way, intercepted and avoided in using the border line in entering the country. They has to go to the port of entry, they has to be documented. So for you, for example, to be able to see that Border Management Authority has an impact is when we see that reduction in the number of undocumented. But secondly, the issue of illicit goods, the issues of illicit cigarettes, for example, we need to be able to start seeing those being reduced in the country, and we should be able to start seeing the impact. The issues of explosives that are being used, particularly coming from this part of the border area coming to the country, used in terms of, for example, ATM bombings or even in illicit mining, we need to see those being reduced. And again, the issues around, I would say, firearms that are entering the country illegally, we need to see that reduction. Lastly, Vuyo, and this is something that it will be easy to assess, is the issue of addressing livestock theft, which is the biggest challenge that is experienced by border communities in the areas I've identified. Those communities must be able to demonstrate that they see a reduction in as far as that is concerned.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Doc, because there's someone who's already complaining, saying, look, can we, Rise Africa says, can we not disclose too much details about the work of the new recruits of the Border Management Agency because criminals are watching too. So I'm going to hit that call. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Dr. Mike Masiapato, who is the commissioner responsible for the new Border Management Authority. And that's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow night, same time.